October is Respect Life Month. And so we want to talk about life and how we're called to support it. It can be a delicate topic, not because it's confusing. The truth is clear. Human beings come into existence at the moment of conception, and life must be protected from conception to natural death. It's delicate because we live in a world that does not recognize this truth, and so we need to state it as the truth that it is. And so we're going to talk about it in three different ways. First, we're going to talk about freedom, real freedom, not free to do whatever we want, like James and John ask of Jesus, do whatever we ask of you, Lord. The Lord meets them where they are, but says, what you're asking is not right, or do I have the ability to give it to you? Then we're going to talk about the amendment that's coming up, the proposed amendment on the Constitution of Maryland. It's morally and civilly against Catholics, against our teaching, what we believe is true, and we're going to talk about different ways in which that's true, how it's against us. And then the reality that the Catholic Church is seeking the good of each person. Actually, this faith that we come to practice and participate in, the recognition of God knowing us, loving us, and desiring for our good, is actually for our good, even if we struggle with some of its teachings. The first reading, as I said, is about the suffering servant, who is Jesus. He saves us from the effects of sin, the final effect of sin, which is eternal death. And he does this by giving his life for us, giving us freedom. This reality we respond to in the responsorial psalm. As we receive God's mercy, there's a call to trust him, right? We don't just receive his mercy, but we are also called to trust him. He's asking us to trust him even as he's giving us forgiveness of sins and the grace and love. He also wants more for us. In Hebrews, we hear that Jesus, the Son of God, became one of us and so has experienced our human weakness and gives us a perfect example of what we're meant to do with the help of his grace. Because Jesus knows our weakness, he provides the strength. Then in the gospel, as I said, James and John seeking what they want, but Jesus meets them in that and gives them what he can. But the important teaching for us is what power and authority we're given is for the sake of service of others, not for pride and glory. It's not to lord it over them or to hold authority over other people, but to be the servant of all. Jesus gives them what they need and shows them true freedom. Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So, real freedom. The Catechism is a great book that tells us and explains church teaching, where it comes from, and is broken down into four different parts. The third part is on morals, and so it addresses real freedom. So I'm going to read three paragraphs from the Catechism that speak to freedom. Freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to act or not act, to do this or that, and so perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. By free will, one shapes one's own life. Human freedom is a force for growth and maturity in truth and goodness. It obtains its perfection when directed towards God, our beatitude, are good. The more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. There's no true freedom except in the service of what is good and just. The choice to disobey and to do evil is an abuse of freedom and leads to the slavery of sin. Freedom is exercised in relationships between human beings. Every human person created in the image of God has the natural right to be recognized as a free and responsible being. All owe to each other this duty of respect. The right to exercise of freedom, especially in moral and religious matters, is an inalienable requirement of the dignity of the human person. This right must be recognized and protected by civil authority with the limits of common good and public order. Or, very simply, as St. John Paul II said in Camden Yards of 1995, freedom is not the permission to do whatever you want, but rather the capacity to do what you should. Pope Francis, speaking on this coming election, spoke against abortion because it's church teaching. And Archbishop Lori restates that truth, as well as put out a letter and a video to inform us clearly to vote no on this amendment. Clearly and directly, which is unique and shows how clearly this is against us civilly and morally as Catholics. To be clear, we're not speaking about politicians or parties, but we're speaking about morals and what is proposed to be in place in the Constitution of Maryland. The proposed amendment is morally and civilly against us. So, just speaking about what it says, question 1 of the Constitution Amendment, the right to reproductive freedom, the proposed amendment confirms an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including but not limited to the ability to make and effuscate decisions to prevent, continue, or end an individual's pregnancy, and provides the state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge the right unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. So we're going to talk about what it's saying, or at least the ways in which it's saying it. But this reality that it's saying we have freedom to choose whether to end life or keep it. It's an inherent evil to take a life. We know that. And so it was said that first we overlook evil, then we permit evil, then we legalize it, then we promote evil, and then we celebrate evil. Then we're persecuted, then we persecute those who still call it evil. So this reality, we're sort of in that legalizing it and promoting evil stage. We don't want to get any further, and we want to actually seek to prevent the legalization of this evil. So the law, it's extreme. Abortion for any reason, any time, through all 9 of pregnancies with no limit. Second, it's changing the Constitution, which cuts out conversation and disagreement. It's not inclusive and doesn't respect the difference among Marylanders. Law can be debated and changed over time, but Constitution generally do not change. Catholics stand in opposition to abortion no matter who we vote for, and this makes us as Catholics not welcome in Maryland. It's ambiguous. It's very vague and open-ended. Definitively applies to abortion, but could also apply to anything related to human sexuality and reproduction. It's not a good law. Fourth, it intentionally doesn't mention parental rights. The writers refuse to distinguish between adults and teenagers, which means it could apply to teenagers. It intentionally does not mention religious exemptions. The writer refused to make any religious exemptions, and it could be used to pressure Catholic hospitals or Catholic physicians and nurses to do anything for reproductive rights. After all, it would be a constitutional right. Now, again, people find this difficult, but the reality is the Catholic Church is seeking for the good of each person. The Catholic Church is here to help us, to encourage us to not do wrong. Also, it's there to help us after we do wrong. There is forgiveness in the Church, and it lifts us up. It's there to help us to start anew. So specifically, in this seek to defend life, Catholics help women before birth through pregnancy centers. We're supporting the pregnancy centers through the Baby Body program right now. And Catholics help women after birth through maternal homes and material support as well. And then Catholics are ready to help women after an abortion, men and women, through the post-abortion retreats and counseling like Rachel's Vineyard. Father John McHale shared a video on a woman sharing her story after she did her retreat at Rachel's Vineyard. And it was very powerful. She didn't recognize what she was anxious and stressed all the time. She didn't know why. She was able to function, but after she had her abortion, 15 years later, she had been, sort of growing in her faith and understanding. And she's like, well, I don't need to go to the Rachel's Vineyard retreat because, I'm still able to function. It's not that big of a deal. But when she went, there was this release, and she recognized the burden that she was carrying, this knowledge and understanding that post-abortion trauma that she was suffering from. We recognize that reality, and we seek to alleviate that through God's grace and forgiveness, and through counseling and help through programs like Rachel's Vineyard. So God in his goodness gives us true freedom, the freedom to do good and to fight against evil. There's no question on the reality of this first question, the so-called question, on whether to amend the Maryland Constitution. As Catholics, we must vote no. We recognize the call to serve others, to care for those in need, and support people from conception to natural death. Jesus gives us his life for this freedom. We're called to follow him.